This podcast is part of the Global Sports Podcast Network, the only network bringing you exclusive daily news and views on your Premier League team, the Premier League, women's football, and fantasy football. A unique listening experience that puts fans first, bringing you the very latest breaking news from your team. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts and make us your first listen every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network. Every club, every day.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
A very warm welcome back to you on this fine Monday where we are reviewing the wonderful weekend of football. We are the Daily English GSPN podcast. I am joined today by the one and only, the voice of our adverts. It's Mr. Louie Easton.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a while since we've done a podcast together, let alone just us two.
Too long, and I've yet to comment on just how beautiful the Bioniq shirt is that you're wearing.
Thank you very much. Opal, show on the back. If you know your stuff, you'll know.
What a legend, yeah. and what a weekend of football. I would say a highly decisive weekend of games where we are going to talk about the challenge of the title, which I think has been decided. Today is a day where Liverpool fans, such as yourself, will be waking up as very, very happy people. Going away to the Etihad and coming away with a 2-0 victory, no less. City had the lion's share of possession and Liverpool seemed to cope and manage really well with that possession. They didn't look fazed by City and frankly didn't look like they were struggling anywhere on the pitch. Even when City worked it well down the wings and managed to get balls into the box was so swarmed with red shirts that there was no offer that City could snatch anything, in my opinion. Even when City worked it well, they were managed by Liverpool, and both goals for Liverpool were absolutely class. I've got streams of stats, records that Mohamed Salah has absolutely obliterated, and I think it's very hard to argue anything against how good that man is. What's your initial reaction from that game, Louis?
Yeah, so I have been really sort of reluctant to say anything about Liverpool winning the league, but I think after that game is the first time all season where I can confidently say I think Liverpool are going to win the league. I think that's decided it. You know, there was another game that we'll get onto later that I think is another reason why I'm more confident now, but that performance against Manchester City, I know they dominated possession, especially in the second half, but it really felt like Liverpool dictated that game from start to finish. There were times, like you mentioned, where Marmoush looked very dangerous. I think he was the one trying to get the most done, as well as Doku, who, I think he completely had his way with Trent Alexander-Arnold, but luckily Ibrahima Konate was on form today, on fine form. The City midfield really struggled. De Bruyne and Foden really had off days. Foden had a couple of times where he was trying to get a shot away, but he just wasn't accurate. He was lacking a threat. And De Bruyne, I just think we're starting to see the twilight days of De Bruyne just because I think he's been rushed back from injury too often. And you could tell that today. He looked a bit tired and it just felt like a sort of shadow of his former self. But like you mentioned, Mo Salah, he absolutely is the front runner for the Ballon d'Or, in my opinion, at the moment. He has been the reason. I think he's been the main reason Liverpool have looked so dangerous, because that's another goal and an assist in a single game for him today, sharing that with Szoboszlai, who I thought was brilliant as well. It was just total domination from Liverpool, start to finish, and I'm amazed that it was only 2-0. I think that's a scoreline that flattered Manchester City, who were looking completely hopeless in midfield.
Yeah, absolutely. And just going back to Mo Salah, let's talk about some of those records that he has set. Mo Salah is the first player in the Premier League history to register 40 plus goals involvements in more than two seasons. Mo
Wow.
Salah is the first player in Europe's top 5 leagues to be directly involved in 50 goals across all competitions 24-25. He's now scored and assisted in 11 Premier League games this season, the most by any single player in a single season, one of Europe's
Whoa.
big 5 leagues since Lionel Messi at Barcelona 14-15.
Whoa.
Mo Salah has
That is
provided more assists in 2024-25 than any other Liverpool player has in a single Premier League campaign. I mean, the list goes on. The guy is unbelievable.
Uh, it, uh, I think this ends the Hazard debate. I've been saying it for months now. Salah's better than Hazard ever was. Well, okay, I mean across their careers, I think Salah at one point was better than Salah ever was in terms of prime. But I cannot get my head around how good he has been because it's every single match now. Every single match it's almost like you're just waiting for it to happen. And you know, I it's one of those players that if you're switched off for 1 second, he punishes you. You have to be switched on the entire game, 110% of the time, to even have a chance at preventing him from getting a direct goal involvement. And for him to be in company with Lionel Messi and that stat you mentioned earlier is that no one's done it since is it's beyond words. It's beyond comprehension.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things to ask you actually on Mo Salah. So the first one is, I think this is purely my opinion. I think Mo Salah is quite an unorthodox footballer. He isn't a naturally
Yeah,
beautiful footballer to watch. However, the things he does with the football are phenomenal. But I think that's the reason that defenders find him so difficult to play against. It's so unpredictable. His train of play. He's not just a winger that likes to cut in from the right hand side onto his left. He can play both ways. He hasn't got the best right foot in the world, but he will utilise it in situations where he has to. And I think he leaves defenders lacking any idea of exactly how to defend him, what foot to stand, which way to show him, and he takes full advantage of that. And I just think
yeah,
that is an unseen thing in football. So when you compare him to Hazard, in my opinion, Hazard was a more naturally flowing football. He was very creative and direct with the ball at his feet. However, defenders could and work out where Hazard's game was going, whereas Mo Salah doesn't allow defenders to know that.
yeah. I think Salah was obviously the better dribbler, but because Salah, even in this form that he's in, there are so many times he dribbles in on the from the right hand side and does lose it. Until these last two matches where he really, I mean, Gvardiol a couple of times and Nathan Ake really struggled to contain him. And you're right, it's sort of like everything he does looks almost accidental, but he's quickest to react. He's a sort of ricochet merchant. And that's what made Luis Suarez so good when he was at Liverpool, because he just bully defenders and sort of bamboozle them and predict where the ball was going to go. That's what Salah is so good. He's so good at anticipation, but he can also create for other players, find the perfect pass. I mean, he had a couple of moments where he would wriggle his way out of three players and then hit a long ball. And that's something that I have not seen Salah do too much of in previous seasons. And he's now completely perfected that Trivela cross that I've seen multiple times now. He is a proper joy to watch, and it's it's the only time I can remember from throughout my years of supporting Liverpool where I have truly felt like we have the best player in the world, and it's so exciting to look forward to watching them um, play now because you feel like you can do anything with someone like Salah in that team.
Yeah, and just one last fact or stat to finish off with. He's the first player to score 25 plus goals and register 15 plus assists in a Premier League season. And that stat kind of leads me on to my next question. The the start of the season showed a little bit of turbulence between contracts and Liverpool Football Club,
Mm.
and nailing down big players in their team to stay at the club. Do you think one, do you think that the Mo Salah situation is resolving itself by his performances? And number two is, do you think you could be in this position in the league without somebody like Salah in the team?
No, absolutely not. And, I don't see where we would replace Salah if we were to move him on because, this is a player that I think has another sort of 2 or 3 really good years in him, and it would be a massive loss for any team with a player of that quality, but let alone us when we're so reliant on him for goals every single match. And it's not an exaggeration, it's every single match. Um, I think Trent is the one that is the least of our worries because his performances recently have been very dodgy. And he showed that again against Man City, completely getting skinned and on ropes. I think he actually got dribbled past in that match more than any other player has been dribbled past in any Premier League match this season. So that kind of tells its own story. And if I'm Real Madrid at this point, you're thinking, well, hang on, if you want these amounts of wages, you better not be doing that at our club. And I think Connor Bradley has been the better right back recently. But it's a difficult one with Salah because he can ask for any numbers he wants. And I think what FSG, our owners, are doing at the moment are they're playing the long game because if we win the league, and I mean, imagine we win the Champions League as well, even, or just one of the two would be incredible. We could have more of a say in the numbers because, you know, we've won the trophy and we can we have more rights to negotiate numbers because now we'll have more players that would want to play for Liverpool. Um, and also, Virgil van Dijk is someone else who I really don't want to lose because what you can say about Salah in attack and what he offers a team, you could say equally about Van Dijk in defence. He has been responsible for so many clean sheets this season, and I don't think we have the same success or the same points lead that we have if he wasn't there. Plus, we don't really have many centre backs. We've got cover for Salah on the right wing in Chiesa, in Harvey Elliott, and we don't have that for Van Dijk because we've got Kanate, Joe Gomez is out injured, and then we've got Jarell Quansah, and then it's just the academy youngsters who have no Premier League experience. Um, so it's a very weird situation to be in at the moment, and I trust it. I do trust FSG because we've got this far without spending that much money. And they have very shrewd business. But I mean, there has to be reason for this madness. I just don't understand it. It's beyond my comprehension. It's beyond every Liverpool fan's comprehension.
Yeah, absolutely. And 11 points clear at the top of the table, not giving away too much because the next game that we talk about is Arsenal West Ham. 7 points if Arsenal win their game in hand. It just seems like a task too far for me at this stage. But we'll talk about that after the Arsenal game. Maybe we should cover that game and then come back to what we think will happen with the rest of the title race.
Okay.
So moving on to Arsenal West Ham. Arsenal were 15 Premier League games undefeated until West Ham, and they lost 1-0 at home. I want to, because I'm very sure that we'll go down the avenue of how poor Arsenal were. I want to highlight just how good West Ham were
Yeah.
across the whole of the pitch. People like Aaron Wan-Bissaka had games that he's not had this season or since joining West Ham, in my opinion. You've got James Ward-Prowse dominating the midfield, Jared
Yeah.
Bowen. Just across the pitch for West Ham, there was a team united to make a difference in the game, and I think that is so powerful, especially when you're a team that maybe doesn't have the superstars, which may be harsh to some West Ham players, but I think you understand my point.
Yeah.
And the game there wasn't much happening in the first half. If I'm honest, there weren't any big chances. The only big chance that came to Arsenal, there was no centre forward that wanted to get on the end of it. And then the best
Yeah.
time you
Yeah.
could potentially score in a game is right before half time. And that's exactly what happened. It was a fantastic counter attack where Jared Bowen picked it up on the edge of his own box, released Aaron Wan-Bissaka, who did a couple of step-overs, whipped in a ridiculous ball, and it was Jared Bowen who got onto the end of it. And he was the only one to react. No, I thought defensively for Arsenal, it was really poor, but it was a fantastic move, all that being said, from West Ham. And the difficulty for me, and this is where I want to come to you now, is there's two things that have happened that have happened in Arsenal's season consecutively or on more than one occasion. And the first one is the discipline has let them down. So yet another red card. And then the other one, I lacked any belief that they were going to come back into that game. There was no momentum to where that game felt that, they're really knocking on the door. And there's another game we're going to talk about shortly where that was the case. But yeah, Arsenal for me lack the title-winning, overarching look as a team.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just can't get my head around the fact that they didn't buy a forward in January, because that is all Arsenal fans were talking about. Havertz isn't good enough and Gabriel Jesus hasn't really had a run. And I just think when you're playing players like Mikel Merino at centre forward, then that's how you know that there is a problem at Arsenal. It's shrewd business, and I don't get it. I just don't understand what happens at the board of some of these clubs, because it just seems so simple to us. But no, you're absolutely right. They really lacked a real threat, and that's despite having 20 shots, but only 2 of them were on target. West Ham also had only 2 shots on target from 5 shots, and they won the match. So that kind of tells the story in itself. One team was clinical, the other team wasn't, and that's how the game ended. It's also the second year running where West Ham have won at the Emirates, which is a crazy thing to imagine, considering the fact that they just sacked their last manager earlier this season, and they haven't really had a great season by the standards that they should be setting as with the team that they have. But they looked incredible today, and I've been slagging off Graham Potter ever since he went to West Ham, because I just didn't understand why you would not go for Moyes instead. I mean, you're seeing the effect he's had on Everton, but they looked unbelievable. I've written down some names. Wan-Bissaka, like you mentioned. I'm just wondering what's going on at Man United, because when they have these players of these quality and they're letting them go and they're immediately doing well. You're seeing Anthony at Real Betis suddenly. It just speaks levels, but that's for another podcast, and I'm sure you'll have your fair share to say on that one. But Wan-Bissaka, Aaron Cresswell, who seems to have been at West Ham for ages, he was a threat with his sweet left foot going forward. Jared Bowen, of course, getting the goal, had a couple of other chances. Todibo at the back, I thought was brilliant. Scars and Ward-Prowse, but the discipline of Lewis Skelly, I think that's... It feels natural to say that it cost Arsenal the game, but they were still flooding players forward afterwards. But it was a red card. It was, and it's stupid, because they got caught out at the back, and then he's had a swing around the player, and that does seem like a huge amount of momentum loss, because it really took a sort of sting out the game, it felt. And Raheem Sterling, that free kick, it was shameful. They were lacking that sort of motivation going forward, the creativity, and it was not a good day for Arsenal, to say the least. And also, from a West Ham perspective, interesting to see Evan Ferguson coming off the bench with the number 34 as well. Best of luck to him.
Yeah, absolutely. Just on the VAR decision, the only thing that bugged me about that situation was the on-field decision. In my opinion, was wrong, but not obviously it was wrong, and he changed his opinion, and that's maybe VAR working in the correct way. But at the time, I don't know how a professional referee, can get that so wrong.
I don't understand. And they're not very consistent with their decisions throughout the season. And that's what annoys me, because if we could have some sort of idea about the level and what is definitely a red and what's definitely a yellow, then that would just be so much easier to live as a football fan. But because of all of this uncertainty and going over to the monitors and, having to correct their on-field decisions. It's so annoying. I mean, it's lucky that they got to the right decision for this one. The Bournemouth one we'll get onto later, I'm sure. That was completely the wrong decision, and correct on field, which is the other way around. It's really annoying, and also the level of handball in Europe is really different to the level of handball in England. So there needs to be some sort of reform across the rules, not just in the Premier League, but across across FIFA, in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely a lack of consistency, but a huge statement nonetheless for West Ham. They've gone now 13 points clear of the relegation zone, which you would argue now means they're not in contention for relegation.
Mm.
And they've pretty much done that away to the rivals at Arsenal, which is even better for them. So the title race then, I alluded to it at the beginning of this podcast, and I'm just going to refer back to it. My opinion is based on the fact that Liverpool have only lost one game in this campaign so far, and the fact that Arsenal don't have an identified striker who is performing, and their performances, to be quite honest, are inconsistent, to
Mm.
say the least. I would say
Yeah.
that it's comfortably Liverpool's league to have.
I think so as well. And if Arsenal win the rest of their games, they get 89 points. And so that means Liverpool have 90 to get to. They're on 64 at the moment. So that's 26 points for the rest of the season. So 9 wins or 8 wins and 2 draws out of 12 game 11 or 12 games. 11 games for Liverpool, 12 for Arsenal. So it's definitely doable, but with the inconsistency of Arsenal going forward, I can't see them winning the rest of their games anyway. They've got a very difficult one on Wednesday night when they play Forest. So that will be Arsenal need that win if they are still within hopes of a title. But they won't get it if they played like they did against West Ham. Absolutely not.
Agreed, and it's fair to say that it would be catastrophic if Liverpool were to fail from this point. But something that isn't catastrophic, something that is, in fact, the polar opposite to catastrophic, is Bioniq, our advert here at the GSPN. So let's tell you a little bit more about that.
Your body is unique. And Global Sports Podcast Network has partnered with Bioniq, the world's most personalised supplements. Bioniq provide 100% tailor-made supplements designed to deliver precisely what your body needs at exactly the right level to optimise your health. No guessing. So click the link in the show notes. Use the code GSPN2025 for 40% off your first month's subscription. Bioniq. Don't settle for off-the-shelf solutions made for just anybody. Get what's right for you right now.
Absolutely. Use that 40% off your first month's subscription. But we're going to dive into my prediction on Friday forecast of the pick of the bunch for this weekend. And my gosh, I am not often right about these things. But crikey, what a game at Newcastle Forest, a 7-goal thriller, and Newcastle edged it just, and it shouldn't have been as close as it was. It really shouldn't. They scored 3 in 11 first half minutes. Forest threatened a stunning second half comeback. Milenkovic pulled one back in the 63rd minute, and then Yates hit a 90th goal and left like a very, very nervy ending for Newcastle. But they did manage to hold on and got all 3 points. And they've moved up to 5th and joint on points with the blue side of Manchester, who dropped points today, obviously, against Liverpool. Louis, what was your takeaway from this? For me, the reason I was so interested in it is both of these teams had a point to prove.
Yeah.
And they did today. I was really impressed with Forest and their response to going down and the deficit that they clawed back. And that was the opposite to what I saw from Arsenal. They made it look as though they could steal a point at the end, but Newcastle saw it out. It was a great Premier League fixture, in my opinion, for a neutral to watch. Forest, I think anything we talk about Forest are doing a phenomenal job in a Champions League place, and we can't condemn them too much for losing away from home.
Well, Forest have been a little bit inconsistent recently. I mean, they had that really strange 5-0 loss at Bournemouth recently. And then they came back and beat Brighton 7-0. So inconsistency, I believe, would be an understatement for them. I mean, they have so much quality in their team. Callum Hudson-Odoi, clinical off that Murphy mistake early on. But who really impressed me from Newcastle was Lewis Hall, because he seemed involved in lots of the attacks, constantly sweeping up the left wing and putting in wonderful crosses. He really deserves to be, in my opinion, the number one choice for England's left back at the moment. And Lewis Miley, what a story for him as well. His first start in a year and he gets a goal. But the first half couldn't be any more different to that second half. I mean, Forest won the second half because they scored twice and Newcastle didn't score at all. But I base that on a sort of bit of complacency from a Newcastle perspective, because they really edged it at the end, like you mentioned, and they were poor from defending corners. Both of Forest's goals coming from corners. And that's where Forest have been punishing a lot of teams recently from their defensive players getting forward and causing havoc in the box. And it was a fantastic game. That was your pick of the bunch. I mean, fair play to you for predicting that 4-3. But I'm speechless when I talk about it, because it was just, there's so much to get into this short segment, and I'm worried I'm going to leave stuff out. Oh yeah, of course, Isak 2 goals in 2 minutes as well, and that penalty, I've never seen anything like it. A Penenka and Matt Sells, who in my opinion has been the goalkeeper of the season, getting a hand to it, but made look so ridiculous. Isak, wow, what a season he's having.
Absolutely, 50 goals in the Premier League, and you know, like, being a Champions League spot for Newcastle is a very reasonable thing to want for Geordie fans up and down the country. And what an upset that would be if they pipped Man City to a Champions League spot and they joined Forest in as one of the other teams. I mean, it just would.
Yeah, I think a lot of their focus will be on their upcoming League Cup final against us at the moment. I mean, that would be amazing for Newcastle. But, you know, not going to talk it too much into existence for obvious reasons.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to look at the bigger picture, because the difference between Forest, who are sat now in third place on 47 points, and them not getting any European football at all, isn't too far to imagine. Villa in 8th, so between 3rd and 8th is 5 points difference. That's 2 games.
That's
It's not
nothing.
a lot. So all of those teams, in my opinion, could make Europe, and I mean, it'd be very disappointing for Forest fans if they didn't make it. But
Yeah,
you'd still, even if they finished 8th, you'd think of it as a successful season. Maybe not from the position they're in now, but at the start of the season, I'm sure Forest fans would have taken 8th.
Yeah, I mean, look, they're still in the FA Cup and they're the highest ranked team still in the FA Cup as well. So they have every reason to want to go for that. But, you know, they can't have one distract them from the other or so on and so forth. And they just need to get their consistency back. They've won 14 from 26. They would have bitten your hand off for that earlier if you told them about before the season. And they've scored 44 goals as well in the Premier League. When you look at them, they've been quite well defensively from what you can see. Still conceding 33 goals, though, so they only have a goal difference of plus 11. But they've lost their last 2 games now in the Premier League. And, you know, the consistency, we've talked a lot about it on this episode, but it's vital for them at this stage. When they're going into this part of the season, the final third of the season, that's where points matter the most. You've got a goal in sight now. Their goal in sight is still to be top 4. And they're only 3 points off 5th. That's absolutely nothing. And in a real 6-pointer as well, they need to just recover from this and be able to bounce back. And I mentioned it will be a difficult game for Arsenal. It will be an equally difficult game for Forest midweek. That's setting up to be a fantastic match.
Yeah, another pick of my bunch for the future. And you do talk about inconsistency, which kindly moves us on to our next game. And these two teams, in my opinion, are the main two teams I've spoke about inconsistency with throughout the season. Villa with their league form and Champions League form, hindering how they performed, and Chelsea. They've only won 2 out of the last 9. But in this game, they made such a good start. Pedro Neto doing incredibly well. He was absolutely on
Yeah,
fire in
he
that
was
first half.
brilliant. Yeah,
And he did everything to make that goal. Fernandes had a little tap in, and it continued. Chelsea had, for me, a few big chances after that. 3 big chances that they just weren't clinical enough. And I remember saying this when they played Brighton, and that's for me the biggest difference for Chelsea. They don't take those chances, those big chances, and that game for me could have been over in the first half if Chelsea had put those chances away. However, against the run of play, Rashford and Asensio combined to make the score level. And then at 1-1, you have Cole Palmer going through on a one-on-one. And I know he slipped, and I know the Villa keeper slipped, but at the start of the season, in the Cole Palmer form that we saw, it's a goal. It's a 100% goal. Chelsea are 2-1 up and probably coming away with 3 points from this game. They weren't to do it, and, a slapdash goalkeeping, which is another huge issue for Chelsea at the minute. Jorgensen with a massive mistake right at the death, and it was the tip of the iceberg for me of the issues that Chelsea actually face. There's so much you can unpick from that team that are struggling on the pitch at the minute.
Yeah, but you say that they're also just 1 point off top 4 at the same time. So that really tells how competitive this season is. But you're right, they really do have a goalkeeper problem at the moment because, I mean, Jorgensen is still young. Let's get that out of the way. He's still a young player that was brought in from La Liga, and he made more saves than any other La Liga goalkeeper last season, I believe. I remember reading when he joined. But they also have Kepa out on loan at Bournemouth. They also have Petrovic out on loan at Strasbourg. So you kind of have to think to yourself, if you're Chelsea and you've sort of given up on Robert Sanchez, who do you want from next season? Do you want Kepa back in goal? He's not been too bad for Bournemouth. Or do you want Petrovic? I remember everyone being absolutely crazy about Petrovic for points of last season as well, and it sort of seemed like they would be even lower had it not been for him. But the quality that they do have going forward. I mean, you mentioned Neto, a brilliant assist for Enzo, and I think he's been severely underrated by not only football fans but also by Enzo Maresca. But like you mentioned, on the flip side, the lonely duo of Asensio and Marcus Rashford. They say never fall in love with a lone player. I think that's going to be very difficult for Villa because the fact that Rashford has got this sort of form immediately. I mean, I saw a real threat in him again when the Villa played against us, Liverpool, earlier in the week. And for him to get 2 assists and Asensio to get his first goal since October, and what a performance as well by Asensio. That is a veteran. That is a player who has been playing at the highest level, and you can just see that difference in quality because Chelsea just didn't really have an answer for him. I don't know where Chelsea go from here because they're the most unpredictable team at the moment, and they have been for quite a long time now, I'd say.
Yeah, absolutely. But as you have alluded to, that they're only a point off top 4 football. So it's any of those teams that are in that area. If any of them can maintain some form of form, for lack of a better choice of words, in the next 12 games, you'd really fancy your chance to get a Champions League spot. and there's no lacking quality in the Chelsea squad or the Villa squad for me. It's just whether they're able to produce the football that we know they can do. Let's be honest, that it definitely is within them. It's just whether they can maintain those results. I think Villa might really struggle as it comes back to the Champions League, and that takes away their squad and their levels, because I just don't think that they've got enough depth to manage both.
And they'll be Chelsea will be thanking Wolves at the moment, because they have really Wolves have done them a massive favour by defeating Bournemouth, which is, in my opinion, the surprise of the weekend. Who would have seen that coming? But
Yeah, without doubt.
can
Before
you
we get into
imagine
the Wolves
Bournemouth?
game, though, sorry, go on, you go.
I was just going to say, can you imagine Bournemouth in the Champions League?
And it's crazy. Like, you could literally have Bournemouth and Forest both in the Champions League.
Oh, it's just great. Yeah, it's a weird season, this one. Really strange.
Yeah, it is. And it's one that I'm ready to get over as a United fan. But one thing I'm not ready to get over is our choice of podcasting platform, which is Zencastr.
Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out as the clear winner, with 4K video recording from your phone, AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs. It's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the description to learn more about Zencastr.
Beautiful. Check it out. Zencastr is where GSPN gets all of their daily podcasts for every team, the women's football, Champions League, fantasy football, Spanish. We've got the lot. They need to go and search us out, but we are the daily English GSPN Premier League podcast. So find us on the social media pages. We are now on YouTube as well, giving you daily content uploaded for you. But before we conclude in our last segment, I would like to discuss the teams at the foot of the table. And you've already talked about it quickly there, but my gosh, Wolves with a shock result, but a man on fire. Cunha, 4 in 4, and he took his chance fantastically well. Bournemouth didn't really have an answer to Wolves' display, I didn't think. I think after I'm saying that name wrong, Zabarai.
Zabani.
Thank you. Got sent off after 31 minutes. It was an uphill task for them. But Wolves played some fantastic football, and to be quite honest, could have won by maybe a couple more goals.
It was a fantastic match. I mean, there was action right from the start. And one player that I really want to highlight from that Wolves team, Nelson Semedo. I know you mentioned Cunha, but the fullbacks for Wolves have been so understated. I mean, we've talked about Ryan Aït-Nouri a bit as football fans this season, but Nelson Semedo he deserves so much praise for his performances recently, because he was pushing up and Wolves were sort of overloading that right-hand side. And he was creating chances from the back and he was tracking back, and Wolves kept a clean sheet in the end. But that Zabani red card is an absolute joke, because the referee gave it as a yellow card. It's one of those where he goes in and he sticks his studs out, but he gets the ball, but his foot almost sort of ricochets off the ball and goes up onto, I can't remember who it was that he challenged, but it's a yellow card on the field, and really not enough contact, in my opinion, to send him off from VAR. It looks bad from one angle where the studs are sort of high on his leg, but if you just look at it in normal speed, it really doesn't look that bad. And 5 years ago, that would never have been a red card. I mean, what are we doing? We mentioned the inconsistency of refereeing decisions earlier, and that is a prime example of it. But Wolves maybe could have got more. I mean, 4 goals in 4 games for Matheus Cunha, absolutely brilliant recently. He scored a wonderful goal against Liverpool recently. One poor sod that I want to bring up, I'm sure he'll be quite harsh on himself about it, Marshall Monetzi, open goal. He's never scored for Wolves. That was the perfect time. He had time. He was right in front of the goal. The ball was put on a plate for him, scuffs it wide. he will be wanting to forget that one and move on quickly. But the way that I saw Wolves play, 2 wins from 3 now, it's probably safe to say that they will probably stay up. They'll probably avoid the drop. Very harsh on Ipswich to go down, but yeah, the quality in the Premier League now is so high that you can see you can see teams that deserve to stay up going down. But Wolves definitely, I think, will stay up now.
Yeah, I mean, just to touch back on the red card, I don't think that it was too difficult a question. I can fully understand why the decision was given. I think that is more telling of today's game and lack of knowledge of what the player was trying to do. There was no intent with that. There was no aggression. It was very close to being a good tackle. He wasn't trying to hurt the other player. Eyes were on the ball at all times.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think he was very unlucky to be sent off. But I also, when I saw it, didn't think it was too harsh either. In the same breath, I could understand the decision by the referee.
Yeah, I just think when you're looking for a reason to send someone off, you're looking for excessive force. I just think it was a bit clumsy. I don't think there's any malicious intent, and for a player to be admonished in that fashion and probably now get a suspension off the back of it is incredibly harsh. And I think someone who has been as key a player recently as Ilya Zabani, apparently Liverpool are eyeing up a transfer for him in the summer. Uh, I think that's really unfair on him, and Bournemouth fans have every right to be upset with that one.
Yeah, and a team that isn't upset and definitely won't be is the significant change in form for Tottenham Hotspurs. Ange Postecoglou's side won 3 on the trot now, which is the first time since December 2023. And Brennan Johnson is one of the names that came out of that game for me, scoring a brace. And he took the game away from Ipswich, really. It could have been a very different story for Ipswich, though. There were 3 massive chances that they had in the first 5 minutes. But Delap, their star man, just didn't manage to convert. And yeah, after an assist from Heung Sun Min, Brendan Johnson scored and it was almost all over. 4-1 was the score at Portman Road, and you've kind of mentioned it, but Ipswich, out of the 2 sides that could stay up in the Premier League, between them and Leicester, I'm talking about, I would argue have the better chance. But I think there's just a golfing class in the squads, and it's quite apparent when they're playing now.
It's a shame for Ipswich because their efforts haven't gone unnoticed. I mean, when they go down, they do not stop fighting until the final whistle, and I think there's a lot to be said about that. You see certain players just, throwing a strop and walking and, jogging around at the top of the pitch. But, Ipswich players will fight tooth and nail to get any sort of result, and they've had a couple of unlucky ones this season. My highlight off the pitch of that one, Ed Sheeran inviting Rupert Grint to that match. So the 2 most famous gingers in the last 20 years have now joined forces at Portman Road. What a joy. Ipswich started well as well. I mean, Delap, as you mentioned, hitting the bar, quite unfortunate, but great link-up from Son and Johnson. I just think if you're Tottenham as well, what do you want to get out of this season? Do you want to... Because they're not going to go down. They're 12th. I think they've done enough to survive, considering the fact that 18th place, 17 points. They're not going to catch them now. But do you just go for the Europa League? I think that's probably what you want if you're a Spurs fan, right, Mikey?
Just go for you're probably right. I think the Spurs fans probably want a run of form that reinstates faith in the manager. Like it wasn't long ago before they were asking for him to be sacked.
And I think that's ridiculous.
They've had a run of 3 games, and it seems to have changed yet again. And I think it
Three
would have
games in the Premier League, I just want to highlight. I mean, they did just get destroyed by Liverpool in the League Cup. And
been.
yeah, that was a fun one. And they also did lose to Aston Villa in the FA Cup as well 3 days later. So now they only are in the Europa League and the Premier League. And I think out of those two, if you're a Spurs fan, you want to go for the European success because that's their only way they're going to get a trophy out of this season.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're right. I, Yeah, I think that's where they need to, but it is Spurs, so the chance of getting a trophy, are stacked against them. Just because, well, it's the most Spurs thing to do, isn't it? Not get the trophy.
Yeah, and there are some fantastic teams that are in the Europa League. I mean, Athletic Bilbao are fourth right now in La Liga, and they're only behind the quality of Barcelona, Real Madrid, and Atleti. They'll definitely be a force to be reckoned with. And Real Sociedad as well, another great one. Roma, Porto, all still in it. It's a brilliant competition, Europa League, because it's the most competitive it's been ever. Um, in this new format as well, finishing fourth. That's brilliant. 5 wins out of 8, 2 draws, only 1 loss. So I think if you're a Spurs fan, that excites you way more than going on a run of Premier League matches. And also, just imagine they go on a little run and start to believe. I think that's the only joy they can get out of this season anyway, because the Premier League has been a total write-off. And I suppose the aim for them would just to be to finish in the top half out of this season where they've been riddled with bad luck in the injury list.
Yeah, absolutely. And talking about teams that are suffering, I guess there's no team suffering more than Leicester currently, other than maybe Southampton. But we're not even going to touch on those guys because they're so far away from any offer of resurrection out of the relegation places. Leicester are sat on 17 points with Ipswich. Yeah, they're in 19th place. It does look like a club that are in trouble. 3 goals in the first half. Saw the home fans booing Revie van Dijk. And it's a massive, massive step back for them, losing 4-0 to Brentford. I don't see any hope for Leicester for me.
No, absolutely not. Leicester, ha- you can blame this on the owners, I think, quite a lot because getting rid of Steve Cooper and bringing in Ruud van Nistelrooy, an unproven manager, it was just ludicrous because Steve Cooper has experience in the bottom half of the Premier League and fighting to stay up. And I just look at Leicester. I do not see an improvement from the beginning of the season whatsoever. They're reliant on Jamie Vardy at a lot of the time. You know, a man coming towards the end of his career, a veteran, but someone who is about 5 years past it. 4 goals. And leaving him up front, and the midfield, the midfield and the defense are just the sloppiest, most disorganized thing in the Premier League. I mean, credit to Brentford. You know, Visa, Clinical, Burmo, and especially Damsgaard caused a lot of problems for Leicester. But when you have a team who are defending in the bottom half, in the bottom of the Premier League, and you're not tracking runners, this is desperate times, and you're not doing the basics of football normally, not able to pass it around in midfield, giving it away and giving away chances for free. Brentford could have put a lot more in as well. If anything, the 4-0 flatters Leicester. Uh, it's an absolute. There are words that I would use to describe them that I'm not allowed to say on this podcast. It's a shocking, shocking watch.
Yeah, it was a quality sidestep there. Yeah, the King Power Stadium was very disappointed. They had a Friday kickoff, and it just looks as though it's a woeful time for Leicester. But I think in these times you can see two things happening. One, the side will go down, and two, they will probably inevitably sack Ruud van Nistelrooy along the way, because I just think there's so long. for it to go on, and if the fans are showing disappointment to the level of which they were this weekend, I don't know how long as a club you can keep a manager in place. If you lose the fans to that level, I think you're struggling. So I think it'd be a full rebuild job, and Leicester will definitely be hoping to come back in the Premier League next season, surely.
It's just crazy the fact that this team won the Premier League less than 10 years ago.
Yeah.
The drop off since then has been. I mean, you can say that the change of ownership in that tragic accident can maybe cause a ripple on effect to the performances of the players. You know, the management changing and everything sort of being a bit hectic behind the scenes, and you know that's unfortunate. But these players just don't. They're not good enough to be in the Premier League. The recruitment, just top to bottom for Leicester, things have gone from bad to worse, I think, for them.
Yeah, and to conclude this episode with a stat, because I feel like we've talked a lot about stats. Leicester are the first side to lose 6 successive Premier League home games without scoring a goal.
Wow, that speaks levels. And also, I've got another stat that I forgot to mention earlier as well. Brentford have won at Leicester for the first time since. Do you want to guess the year? Rough estimate.
Oh my God, 2000 and I don't have a clue. It's 3-2.
2002 is your final guess.
Yeah.
You're 49 years off. 1953 was the last time that Brentford have won at Leicester. In their defence, they have only visited them 6 times since then, and they've won on their 6th in good fashion as well for them.
Absolutely. And on that note, I'd like to conclude today's episode. That has been the Monday Review. We are the Daily English Premier League podcast. I've been Mikey Thompson, joined by Louie. Louie, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you from me.
Yeah, thank you for having me on the Monday Review. Hopefully, you'll have the normal people back next week and have a bit more positive things to talk about from the lower perspective without being too harsh.
I loved your insight, to be fair, pal. I hope it's not too long till we do another one. But for now,
Yes.
It's goodbye from me and goodbye from Louie. I hope you all have a wonderful week until we see more Premier League football next time.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.